So I'd like to. I had a conversation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the story that was going around the internet over the weekend. I don't know if it's died down or not. It probably hasn't technically, to do with Bradley Cooper. We teased this last night. Bradley Cooper and wearing a prosthetic nose, and there was quite a bit of noise made in some circles. I suspect the very precious far left circles, in my opinion, about a prosthetic nose, and this term Jew face I find just repugnant. It just feels wrong, but they're likening it to blackface. Yeah, it just feels so wrong. But they're likening it to blackface because he was wearing a prosthetic nose to look more like the playwright and musician Leonard Bernstein, who did West Side Story, I think, from memory. And the part of this conversation that I'm really interested in is the idea of appropriation versus representation and where those lines are. So what I've done is I actually contact, because it's about Jew face. I thought, well, I'm not part of that community. We should get representation and have a kind of a chat about it and see what's going on. So I made contact with a synagogue in Wellington. I contacted their office, and I suspect most synagogues in New Zealand would be a bit like, in the current climate of what's going around the internet, might be a bit iffy about it. But I contacted the current synagogue, as I always do when I contact people. I go, look at us, this is where we sit, this is who we are. And they put us in touch with the, is it called the NZ Jewish Council?
Yep.
The spokesperson for the New Zealand Jewish Council. So I went to the synagogue, which I think, as from my Catholic roots, is basically the church. So I went to the Jewish church. The Jewish church said, here's the person we'd like you to speak to. And we spoke to that person. Her name is Juliet Moses. And what I've done is, the conversation was too long for this show. And like from in the past, if they're too long, we'll put them up in their entirety on the Patreon, and we'll play some clips as we go through the night. So if you're a patron, you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/Big Hero News, and you can hear the full, it's about 35-minute conversation. So it was too long to play in this conversation. And the more kind of looking into this idea of Jew face, the more we found, how do we say it, Chewy? Many in the Jewish community didn't really care about it.
Yeah,
would that be fair?
I reached out to a few people that I know, and that the people that I know recommended that I could ask, and that sort of thing. In my experience, was the vast majority of people were like, we don't really care. We don't see this as an issue. And that kind of lines up with what Leonard Bernstein's own kids have said.
Yeah, probably.
Is that they don't have an issue with it. And I think that's where I sit as well.
Well, let me read this out to you, because this is what we do. Maybe this is when my talkback brain kind of takes over. I go, oh, here's an issue. I can use that to get into another conversation. I can use that topical thing to talk about something else. So I wrote to a group as well called the Alternative Jewish Voice. And this was their response to me. Hi, Pat. Alternative Jewish Voice tends to be very focused on issues concerning Zionism, Palestine, and Israel, and how they intersect, as well as anti-racism and the current narrow Jewish representation here in New Zealand. We don't cover the very wide spectrum of views about Judaism, Jewishness in society around the world. So this isn't a topic that we have any interest in even worrying about. So what I've done is, I saw this as a way to get into a conversation about representation and appropriation. That's the conversation that really interests me. So the full interview is on Patreon. You can go and check it out for yourself. Patreon.com/Big Hero News. The full 34-minute interview is on there. But because there's not enough time for it, as we've done in the past, I've pulled out a couple of clips that I want to speak to, which is actually about the more interesting part of the conversation to me, which is general representation. So, anything else before I play a couple of clips?
No, go for it.
Okay. So the first clip, I had a chat with Juliet, and the point was made by Juliet. So Juliet, so is not so much of a fan of the prosthetic nose, around the idea of what purpose did it serve. Bradley Cooper, apparently, I didn't know this, but played the Elephant Man with no makeup. I don't know this movie she talks of. So in other words, and we all know about, Hamilton, the Caucasian founding fathers are played by minorities. So you don't have to look like the person to be a part of it. It doesn't take away from it. You think about, there's two movies about Apple. One's Ashton Kutcher. One is Michael Fassbender, who don't look anything like Steve Jobs, but they just play it. So part of her conversation, as I said, you can go look for the whole thing yourself at the Patreon page, is that she was like, what's the point of it? Now, this is where we're going to start with the conversation. I don't think what I'm going to say is I had a pushback, but I kind of can see a point to it when you look at some other movies. And that's where the conversation starts tonight in the first clip we're going to play.
I saw someone say Tracy Ann Oberman, who's a quite well-known British actress who's Jewish. She said, but Bradley Cooper acted as the Elephant Man. I think he was in a play, and he didn't have any prosthetics as the Elephant Man, and he was perfectly able to, just through contortions of his face and his body, you know, sort of portray the disfigurement of the Elephant Man. So, you know, why did he? Surely he's a good actor. Surely he didn't need the prosthetic nose to actually portray Bernstein. So,
Look,
so that's
I think
the kind
no,
of.
I think you're right. I completely agree with you, like 100% right. But as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about the movie Churchill, and just so you know, I think as I speak. So this has just come to me now. I think about Gary Oldman in the movie Churchill, right? And you could argue the same about Gary Oldman. He didn't need this makeup and this prosthetic to be Churchill, this is what he looks like in real life for people watching. But it did something, to me at least, watching the movie, to pull me into watching Churchill. So I think you're right every single time. Like there's movies about, and I think Ashton Kutcher did one and Fassbender did another on Steve Jobs. And the way they got dressed up was to wear a black skivvy. They didn't have any prosthetic. They didn't need it. But if they choose it, how do we therefore know if it's a harmful choice, an unnecessary choice, a choice that they want for the movie or not? Because could you argue that Gary Oldman didn't need this makeup, but he chose to have it?
Yeah.
Or is it because because we're talking about a Jewish trope? We should be more sensitive with those choices.
It's the racial stereotyping. Right. And look, I'm not even. I just want to say I certainly don't think this is the crime of the century, and we have far bigger issues to worry about. So I just want to contextualize that I'm not one of the people who's like jumping up and down and going, "Oh my God, this is terrible." But we're just sort of teasing out the arguments, right? So so yes, and the other example I've thought of is Nicole Kidman played Virginia Woolf, didn't she? In a what was it called? The Hours or something. It was based on a very good book, and she had a prosthetic nose in that. So I was thinking to myself, well, firstly, she's also a brilliant actor and probably didn't need that nose either. But again, it wasn't a matter of playing into a caricature or a racial stereotype or whatever.
Because sometimes it's also, like I look at those photos that are on screen now for people who are watching, and the Virginia Woolf character on the right doesn't look like Nicole Kidman to me. I wonder if sometimes from a production point of view, it's also about the audience not seeing Bradley Cooper, not seeing Gary Oldman, not seeing Nicole Kidman. And actually, being fair, I think people will see that and probably still see Bradley Cooper. So there you go, Chuck. Number one. Thoughts, sir?
I think when it comes down to this discussion, intent is really important.
Yes, but how do we know?
I think, and it is hard to know. I mean, when we talk about, the Jewish trope, we're talking about that hook-nosed, money-grubbing, just horrible, Nazis loved it, and it's still banging around in some of the worst parts of the world. I don't think that's the intention here. I think the thing is could Bradley Cooper have done this without the nose? I think the question is yes. Would we or anyone be talking about it, good or bad? Will we be talking about the movie at all? No. Would we be
hang on, but on that point, I don't know if that's right, because one of the criticisms from some circles is that he was Jewish, not playing a Jewish person. So there's this representation. So you're talking about, is it a trope, is it not? But there's also the context of, the Lin-Manuel Miranda in The Heights, they weren't the dark-skinned Latinos, they were lighter skinned, and he got had up for colorism, kind of trying to show a more, shall we say, Caucasian version of Latinos rather than the people who actually live in Washington Heights. So you might be right. Actually, if you go and have a look at the full interview on Patreon, you'll also see that's a part of the conversation. Is that what is the whole context around that? And look, just to also to come back to what you said, and you said this before. This is from Slate.com. Bernstein's 3 children signed off on Cooper's look with a joint statement reading in part, "It happens to be true that Leonard Bernstein had a nice big nose. Bradley chose to use makeup and amplify his resemblance." So his kids are saying to look like our dad. And we're perfectly fine with that. We also are certain our dad would have been fine with it as well. Cool. So I think you're right.
So for me, that's the end of it. Like,
yeah,
the
right.
people closest to him are like, cool. And then I think people have latched onto it. And you know, there's so many questions about actors and the portrayal of characters and tropes and all of that sort of stuff. And some of it is quite worthwhile. Some of it I think should be couched in the style of like, is it there to take the piss out of a group or make them lesser or smaller or punch down or that sort of thing? Or is the community that is being represented happy with the representation? Or is it somebody, like we've discussed in the past, going, oh, here's a way that I can prove that I am the most virtuous person around by pointing at this? Like, I think of another example, Scarlett Johansson in Ghost in the Shell.
Right.
Like, that was a big thing about, they've cast a Caucasian actor to portray a Japanese character, right? Because it was an anime. And I was like, oh, this is a good meaty one. And then you see the comparison between the anime and the movie. And you're like, oh, okay, well, the cartoon didn't look particularly Japanese either. And when you get down to it, it's a robot. So people got really bent out of shape. And then I think there's some quite legitimate ones. I think there was a movie called Aloha or something where they cast a white actress to play a Hawaiian character and just, you know, darkened the skin up a little bit. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm a bit more uncomfortable with that one.
That one's interesting though with ScarJo, because she's not playing a nationality, she's playing a cartoon. So is she playing a cartoon which is representing a nationality? It's like 2 steps removed. That's a really interesting one. And I'll look, it actually flows into the next part of this 3-minute clip I want to play, because when you talked about being virtuous and pointing over there, what happens in representation in art when you want to be maybe so virtuous, or you want to have so much diversity and conclusion? To do so, you have to shit on another minority. In other words, you've got to kind of go, we're going to be much more inclusive, but in doing so, you're eliminating a minority group. And I'll just play the clip for you, but it's about Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, the new version of it, not having 7 dwarfs. Because I think about representation, and you talked about the young black girl seeing Littlest Mermaid, fantastic. You know, we all shed a tear when we saw those. But in the same breath, what about the young kid with dwarfism that now doesn't see the dwarf, the little person up on screen, other than Peter Dinklage, who's in everything. In that other situation, rather they get replaced, and I've showed it already, by these 6 people and 1 little person. And I think to myself, this probably sounds quite gross, but that's the way it's coming out of my head, is there a representation hierarchy? And is it that, if you're a certain ethnicity, a certain gender, you cannot be played unless it's by someone within that community? And do we go down the hierarchy? Maybe little people is at the bottom. Maybe Jewish is at the bottom. I don't know, because, Bradley Cooper.
Well,
and is there a hierarchy that we society accept, that you don't have to be a part of that community to play it? And there's other parts that we go, no, you definitely have to be a part of that community if you're going to play it.
So that argument has certainly been made about the Jewish issue, if I can call it that. So David Baddiel, who's quite well known as a British comedian, he's been quite outspoken on this issue, as has Maureen Lipman and actually Sarah Silverman as well. And they've all sort of said, well, we're not saying necessarily that a person of a minority should play a character of that minority, but that kind of seems to be where we're at in society. And then why the double standard with Jewish people? So
Right.
they're more sort of
So
pointing
they're
out
flipping
this
it.
double standard.
They're flipping it. They're saying if you
Yeah.
have to be trans to play a trans person, if you have to be gay to play a gay person, if you have to be the right Latino to play a Latino person, why are you allowed to not be Jewish and play Jewish? That's what they're asking.
Yeah. Are we not considered to be a minority that's worthy of the same kind of protections or, you know, sensitivities around representation or whatever it is as other minorities? So that's the argument that they make. Yeah.
Could it be that to be Jewish, as you say, there's no look, is harder to see on screen? So the young black girl in Chicago sees the young black Littlest Mermaid and goes, she looks like me. Is it a lot to do with the way someone looks? Because maybe you see someone, I mean, like there's that classic Between Two Ferns scene with Paul Rudd. It's a
Oh, I love it. I've watched it so many times.
The question he gets asked is, how would you advise a young Jewish person to hide his Jewishness as well as you have?
Yeah.
You know, so it's a joke, offensive joke made for them, if you know the thing, and they both crack up laughing, which they have to obviously cut out.
Yeah.
Is it possibly because I don't know who's Jewish, so I don't see representation or not when I see it on screen unless I know the backstory?
I think that that would certainly be relevant. Absolutely. And then that kind of comes back to what we started talking about, was the prosthetic nose. Is that the only way that they could actually signal to people that he was Jewish? Or did they feel that that was important to do it? So, yeah, so they are sort of interrelated issues. But yes, I would say that could well be something to do with it.
There you go, True Meister. What do you think?
I think a really good example got brought up in the chat while we were playing that video. Like there's lots of examples of actors doing it right or movies doing it right and doing it wrong. Right? We talk. You mentioned Peter Dinklage. He's on record going, Disney got it wrong on that. They got it right in one hand, and then you shat it all out on this side. Like.
But hang on. Hang on. That story though, the full story is Peter Dinklage made quite a big song and dance on Mark Maron's podcast about, you know, that in this day and age they still have dwarfs in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and then there was a whole bunch of the little people community who are like, "What the fuck are you doing? You've just lost us work." Like, so actually people within his community is like, yeah, it's good for him, Golden Globe winner, Emmy winner, you know, all the roles he's been given, but we actually want a job here, which is where we started this conversation, when it seems like maybe Disney's being so inclusive that actually they're taking work away from a bunch of little people who kind of fit the bill perfectly, because it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And there's that aspect of it as well, that many in his community, his little people community, weren't that happy with him speaking out about why would we have dwarfs in this movie in today's day and age. And there's all these actors going, because we want the fucking work and there's not enough jobs that come around for us as it is, and this is a job we could have. What about that part of it?
I must admit, I read the blurb from Dinklage incorrectly there.
Okay.
You know, when we're talking about dwarf actors as well, like I remember with Lord of the Rings, the first three movies, they used a lot of dwarf actors, and then when The Hobbit came around, they didn't, because the dwarf actors had realized their worth for such a big movie. They're going to need a lot of hobbits here, where it actually became cheaper for Peter Jackson to cast normal sized people as dwarfs, and they just sized up the costumes and props to make them look smaller, because that was cheaper. So I mean, you know, Peter Dinklage has done all those dwarfy roles, and he's just like, I'm just tired of it. I want to be a sensible actor, and he's earned that, but he's climbed that by doing those shitty dwarf roles as well.
Yeah, and now he talks about not wanting to apply for roles for dwarves, but you know, he's got a fantastic performance in Elf, where he needs to be a little person, because part of the joke is, what's his name, the comedian that plays Elf, his name jumped out of my head, has to kind of think he's one of Santa's helpers, so he has to be a little person playing that role. And just for clarity, to make sure we're all on the same page, this is what Peter Dinklage said. During a conversation regarding Disney's upcoming live-action remake of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Dinklage praised Disney for casting a Latina actress as Snow White, right? But condemned them for continuing to present what he believed to be outdated stereotypes when it comes to the Seven Dwarfs. So,
I don't see the Seven Dwarfs as a stereotype.
But so Snow White, right, who in the book is not Latina, great representation, but the dwarfs who are a minority, the little people who are a minority, we got to get rid of that and have better representation. So it's a really, I mean, we're not going to find that. Oh, we thought we'd find the answer to every question tonight, didn't we? So we have to find an answer to this. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to
90-minute show. I've got some bad representation, and I think we can all agree on this one.
Is it going to be someone?
Mickey Rooney, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Now this ticks all the box. White actor portraying a different race in a harmful stereotype for the purpose of mockery. That bad Mickey Rooney, bad Breakfast at Tiffany's. Absolutely.
What about? I've just thought of one as well. What's his name? John Wayne playing Genghis Khan. Have you seen that one?
Oh, fuck me.
John Wayne playing Genghis Khan.
Jesus Christ.
But then again, I think we're going to wrap up this conversation now. We're talking about intent, right? Because then you look at Robert Downey Jr. playing a black American in Tropic Thunder, and wildly described as a fantastic role, because for some reason they were able to make the intention clear that the actor playing the actor was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Australian, and they managed to spin it to point out how ridiculous it was for that person to be playing a black American soldier. So even though he literally did blackface, black body, black everything, they managed to get the script down well enough to show that what we're showing is the lunacy of someone wearing blackface. And I guess give them credit, they managed to pull it off, because in this day and age, if you tried that, even if that was the intention, you'd still probably be quote unquote cancelled. Did I say the wrong name? Because Kookie's just saying Robert Downey Jr. I might have said a different name.
Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder. There's actually a great clip, and this is probably the only time it's from the Joe Rogan Experience, whatever. Jamie Foxx is talking about Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder, and he's just like, people completely missed the idea. And I remember that blowing up before the movie dropped, and I went to see the movie, and I was like, oh, it's really clear what they're doing. They're poking fun at the thing that people were criticizing them for.
100%.
That's good satire.
100%.
That's exactly it. And they did the right thing. They just carried on. And it's fine.
And Robert Downey Jr. has said, maybe it was the same podcast that Jamie Foxx said, you'll never be able to do that again. That'll be the last time that ever happened.
Yeah, no, it is actually. I'd go and find the clip. It's pretty easy
big fans.
to find.
Chewie and I are big fans of Mr. Rogan, obviously.
Yeah. But yeah, I look, in this, just to cover it all off, in this particular instance, when we're talking it, the bottom line for me is his kids are fine with it. They're the people closest to him. Yes, this question, did Bradley Cooper need the nose? I would say probably not. I don't think it would really add to the movie too much. It's not in the same leagues as the prosthetics that Gary Oldman wore, which made him unrecognizable.
Yeah, totally.
I completely forgot he was in the movie. It was Winston Churchill.
It was like, what's the Irish actor? Young fella, not young anymore, who played the Joker, and he was unrecognizable.
No, it was Penguin.
A Penguin, sorry. Unrecognizable.
Same sort of thing. Look, yeah. And I think, look, it's people being really, and I think rightly sensitive to the Jewish hook nose meme trope, whatever you want to call it. It's fine to be sensitive to that because it's been fucking weaponized.
And I think what
decades.
I think what I'm learning, and I've been educated by several people in the Jewish community about this, and I remember having this conversation on this show with someone when I was a bit like, why is anti-Semitism seen so much worse as even racism sometimes? I don't know if it is or not, but it seems that way. And the answer that I learned was, it's not that Jewish people get blamed for things down the end of the line. It's that when you get to the end of the line, they're always blamed for things. Like they're always at the end of, they're always the last group to go. If you track down to who was the original sinner here, it's always the Jewish community. So therefore, if a real life person had a bit of a hook nose, and this is what I think I heard in the conversation I had, which you can see on Patreon, and they're Jewish, even though that might be accurate, it might not be good to portray them with a hook nose, because that speaks to the trope. Even if it's accurate for that one person, it speaks to the trope for all the Jewish community. And at the end of that line, they'll get bitten for it. And that, I often think about that when I think about anti-Semitism. It's not that anti-Semites blame Jews for stuff. It's that they blame them all the time for everything. They're always the ones at the end of the problem list. You know what I mean?
Yep. I think the other aspect of it is Jews are in the interesting position that they're a religion and an ethnicity. But what does a Jewish person look like?
I don't know if they're an ethnicity, because that would be Israeli.
Well, no, that'd be a nationality.
Ethnicity? Oh, yeah, okay, fair enough.
You could be a non-Jewish Israeli.
Yeah, no, fair.
But there's a huge gamut, like our guest. For the interview, like if you just put a picture up, I wouldn't be able to go, that's a Jew.
Yeah.
Like I could with a Chinese person or a black person or that sort of thing. So, but even so you only have those harmful tropes to come.
But even that, you said a Chinese person. I mean, they could be from a myriad of Asian countries. Don't know if we'd know if they were there.
Yeah,
but then
it's an Asian person, right?
I guess the flip side of that is, if you saw a photo of someone and they had the troped hook nose, you'd go, who is this trying to represent? You'd probably say, well, it's ugly, but they're trying to say it's a Jewish person. So that kind of, I had this thought the other night. It's completely.
And then you come back to intent.
Yeah, this is back to this is a bit of a tangent, but because I didn't think about this for this show. I thought about a couple of days ago. I just thought, are stereotypes because they're percentage-wise mostly true? Like, we think of people from Holland being tall. Is it because in Holland they have a very tall population, or is it that they don't? So in the conversation that you can see on patreon.com, right, if you go and watch it, that was talked a little bit about by Juliet, and she said actually the trope of the big nose is not even accurate. Like, the majority of Jews don't have big noses. So the stereotype is inaccurate. And even I was having this conversation 2 or 3 days ago in my head about other things. I was just like, are stereotypes because they're mostly true? Or are stereotypes because they're used to punch down and they're not true at all, but it's been put onto an ethnicity or onto a people group as a way to kind of make them lesser? And I think it's that, thinking about that conversation.
Yeah.
Before we move on, let me just do this as well, because I said who it was. There is Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
There is Colin Farrell as the Penguin.
I did not pay a lot of attention. Well, I knew Colin Farrell was in that movie. I didn't know what role he was playing. So I think I was about 3/4 of that movie going, I wonder when Colin Farrell's going to turn up. Because he's quite highly credited and I couldn't see him. And then, I was like, oh, shit.